The reason we're here is the point of all of this, as that beautiful sentence in chapter 2, and everybody should read it and think about it on a regular basis. The goal of the Legion, the purpose of the Legion, the point of the meetings, the point of the work, the point of the daily Catena is the glory of God. That sounds really good, but it's a long sentence. Father Duff wrote a lot of long sentences. And in this long sentence, the goal is the glory of God, and that is followed up by a particular way of obtaining the glory for God. And that is the glory of God through the sanctification of its members. Note, not the glory of God by the good works we do. Not the glory of God by the eloquent prayers we say. But the glory of God by the changing and transforming of our character. And so the transformation of character is part and parcel of the reason for being of the Legion of Mary. That's a remarkable statement, articulated well before the Second Vatican Council's notion of the universal call to holiness. The glory of God through the sanctification of its members by means of. Okay, so this is not an abstract thing. There is a concrete way of making it happen. And this is where it gets fascinating. By means of prayer, we would expect that, but prayer is not enough. And that reminds us that the Legion is not a prayer group. But prayer is part of what we do, but is not the only thing we do. Prayer, and note the words, active participation in. Not passive participation, but active, meaning invested, engaged, and involved. Participation in something that isn't our own. And that's important too. Participation in Our Lady's and the Church's work. Something bigger than us. And work specifically of the crushing of the head of the ancient serpent and the building up of the kingdom of Christ. What a remarkable statement that is. Everything in the Legion is related to that and at the service of that. And that statement tells us something. The rhythm of the meeting, the work commitment, the daily praying of the Catena, all of these things are not first things we do. They're the means by which each one of you grows in holiness. The work isn't simply a task to be accomplished. It's the way you have been given that week to move forward your personal sanctification. And so the works we do are not simply about helping others. They're also about shaping us into holier men and women. What a remarkable notion that is. And that reminds us the Legion is not simply a service organization either. There are many of those in the church, and they're fine. But this is something different. Growth in holiness through the prayer and through the participation in the works. What a remarkable thing. It's not simply an act of kindness. It's a movement of spiritual growth. Coming out of that, we spent some time with the second most important sentence in the handbook, which speaks of the most important obligation of the member of the Legion. Now, every time I ask a group of legionaries what that is, it's interesting the answers that come out. Attendance at the meeting, faithfulness to the works, the daily prayer. And the answer to all of those is no, that's not it. As one of my old philosophy professors told me when I handed in a paper that wasn't quite on target, great strides, but outside the road. In other words, the answers aren't bad, but they missed the mark. They missed the point. The very first sentence in chapter 6 is likewise something every single member of the Legion should know and be familiar with it, because we can't understand the Legion and its system without paying attention to this. So chapter 6, the heading is The Duty of Legionaries Toward Mary. It follows chapter 5, which speaks of the devotional outlook of the Legion. And so listen to what this says. The honoring of the Legion devotion to Mary by serious meditation and zealous practice is placed on each member. Note there are no exceptions here. Each member as a solemn trusteeship to the Legion. In other words, each member is entrusted with something and is accountable to the Legion for it. It is to be regarded as an essential part of legionary duty, not an optional part, ranking before any other obligation of membership. And we might find that to be a surprising statement, because we're conditioned to think there are other things that are the most important. The weekly attendance at the meeting and the works. And right here, very clearly, the handbook, Frank Duff, is saying there's something more important than the meeting. There's something more important than the work. There's something more important than the secret bag. There's something more important than all of the structural pieces that preoccupy us. And it's not that they are unimportant. It's that something is more important. And it's this. And the reason why is all of those things, the meeting, the works, the contributions by means of the secret bag, the fellowship, all of those things spring from the devotion that the Legion has for Our Lady, which is not necessarily the same as what our private devotion might be at home. And so there's an obligation to learn, understand, reflect upon, and with zeal, which means with some enthusiasm, to practice it. That's what a day like this is. That's the point of the conferences we've been giving. That's the point of what these formation experiences are that we have. It's an opportunity first not to refresh ourselves with handbook knowledge. That's important, but that's not exactly what this is. What this really is an opportunity to reconnect ourselves to the fundamental devotional impulse at the heart of the Legion. To understand it more fully so that we have a chance of living it well. And when we do that, sometimes a lot of those questions about details that we have begin to answer themselves, because we have a sense of what the point is, what they are serving. And that's really important to recognize. There's a point to all of this, and we never want to miss the point with our time, with our energy, with our service, with what we're doing. And so the previous round of conferences in English unpacked various aspects of that, including talking how the elements of the meeting have a spiritual underpinning to them, which flows right out of this idea. We did a conference on basic elements of the Legion's devotional outlook yesterday, so those resources are available. Today we'd like to build on all of that by looking at another familiar but often neglected piece of our normal, ordinary rhythm of life in the region, which is a really overlooked resource with regard to forming ourselves and forming new members. And once again, it is found in the handbook. And sometimes you wish with the handbook they will put big gold stars on certain sections and say, this is really important, make sure you don't miss it. One of the problems of a long and complex work like this is sometimes we simply don't find the treasure because there's so much digging you got to do. But in the handbook is something that we're supposed to do on a regular basis, and it is worth talking about, and that's what we're going to focus on here today. It's found on page 109. Point number 7 in chapter 18, the order of the presidium meeting. And so we're going to pull something out of the ordinary operating of the presidium meeting as being an incredibly powerful and useful resource. It's something that we do once a month. And so point 7. The following standing instruction is to be inserted on the worksheet or otherwise placed so as to ensure that it will not be overlooked at the proper time. Note the language, though. Make it a point not to skip this. Make it a point not to miss this. Don't forget using it. It's basically saying, photocopy it and slap that page right on the table in front of you with a big gold star on it so you don't miss it. And read out by the president at the first meeting of each month immediately after the signing of the minutes. And so once a month at least, and also when we have visitors, this is to happen. And so note, it has a dual-fold purpose. On the one hand, if a guest comes who is unfamiliar with the Legion, at the very beginning of the meeting, after we sign the minutes of the last meeting, this is read for the benefit of the new person. In other words, it has something to say for someone who is interested in the Legion of Mary. But regardless of whether we have a visitor or not, on the first meeting of every month, we read it for ourselves. In other words, the Legion is insisting we need to remind ourselves of something over and over and over again. And not simply because we're forgetful, but so that we have a chance of entering into it more deeply. You know, and let's be honest though, we get to that moment where we read the standing instruction, and the president goes, and now we read the standing instruction, and we have the experience of listening to it as if it's being read from the phone book, and then we move on. You know, and that's typical, okay? And I say that not to criticize, but just to point out how easy it can be to overlook certain things. And a certain attentiveness is worthwhile here. Because it's important to say, if we're reading this every month, what is so significant about these words that we do that? What is so significant about these points that we need to keep reminding ourselves of them? They must contain something of the secret, the essence of the Legion's devotion. They must contain something of an orientation as to who we are and what we are about. And so having already seen that there is a duty that outranks all of these, we recognize these must be at the service of that great duty of reflecting upon and zealously practicing the Legion's devotion. And so once a month we read, and I'm dropping stuff all over the place here. Legionary duty requires from each legionary, first, the punctual and regular attendance at the weekly meetings of the presidium, and the furnishing there of an adequate and audible report on the work done. Let's just linger with that, because it is saying an awful lot. Number one. But again, number one under the subheading of what is more important, okay? So if we're going to know and zealously practice the Legion's devotion, element number one of that zealous practice is the regular, punctual attendance at the presidium meeting, and showing up is not enough. And at the meeting that one is actually attending, the furnishing of an accurate and audible, note the insistence, and an audible report on the work done. In other words, one, No one is allowed to be silent for the entire Legion meeting unless they're a visitor. Every active member on the table is obliged, and I can't stress that enough, obliged to speak. We're obliged to speak when the prayers are being said, because our voices must be part of the prayer. And we are obliged to speak when attendance is taken. And the taking of attendance at a presidium meeting is never to be done silently. You know, we have that strange practice. The vice president is sitting there. She can see everybody around the table but calls all the names anyway. And we can't just nod, we have to speak audibly our response. And then the vice president calls her own name and says, "Present," and then notes her own attendance down. Note, because this is an issue of responding to the call of Our Lady through the presidium. And so the call must be given, and the call must be responded to. And then each and every member who has been entrusted, note my words carefully, entrusted with a work, must account for what he or she has been trusted with. And now as we look at this, first let's look at the question of what happens when somebody is interested in joining the Legion. When they come, this and the following points are read. And we lead with the meeting, which includes the work report. And that raises the question for us, first, do we respect the meeting well enough to receive a new member into it? That's an interesting question. It's not simply a matter of, are we doing things in the proper order? We need to do that, but that's not enough. That's not enough. I've been to enough presidium meetings around the country and in other parts of the world where the order is proper, but the spirit is dead. And so respect for the meeting is the first note that's sounded here. Note it says regular and punctual attendance. So let's explain what that means. The commitment is to attend the meeting weekly. And note, even when somebody is interested in joining the Legion, we don't say, "Oh, welcome aboard, give us your name, sign up, you're a member." We ask them to attend consistently for 12 consecutive weeks. You know, and recognizing there's a little slop in the system because life gets crazy. But you know, if a person says, "Well, I can make 4 out of the 12, we already know. Until you can attend regularly, you are not ready to be an active member. No, just because somebody shows up doesn't mean they get in. You know, that's really important to recognize. The probationary period works 2 ways. It gives the person a chance to gradually learn the Legion, and we need to explain that. You're not going to understand everything all at once. So we have this longer period so you know what it is that you're getting into. You know who we are. But it also gives us a chance to get to know the candidate. Is he or she really a good fit? And so note the importance now of the meeting as being the place where we get to know somebody who wants to belong. And where somebody who wants to belong gets to know us. And so part of that then says, there's nothing wrong with explaining the parts of the meeting as we go through when we have a visitor. That is not breaking the order of the meeting. That is opening the meeting up so that somebody who is new has a chance of entering into it. Because the meeting has a formational role. But the point is that attendance isn't enough. It's got to be punctual. Now, isn't that a kick in the head? Punctual. So let's explain what punctual means. If the meeting starts at 7, punctual means you're getting there 5 or 10 minutes early. Okay? Punctual means I'm not arriving at the crack of 7. It means I'm ready to begin at the time the meeting begins. For the officers or whoever is in charge of preparing the space, it likewise means you get there early enough to have everything ready so that the meeting begins on time. 7 o'clock, if you can't begin at 7, then push the meeting time to 7:15 and be honest about it. But then what happens is we push the meeting time to 7:15 and now we're not ready until 7:30. But note that this is a real discipline. But unlike other groups, and we've seen this, how many times have you been in a parish meeting and the one who's leading the meeting says, let's begin with a prayer, and he or she is making the sign of the cross and everybody's still shuffling their papers. Someone's taking that last sip of coffee. There's all this movement. I myself have led prayer at enough of these meetings where I've created a long, awkward silence after that sign of the cross, just waiting for everything to stop. Note, the Legion meeting begins when everybody gets on their knees. That's the beginning of the meeting. It's not the sign of the cross of the opening prayer. It's when we're on our knees. And so at 7 o'clock, if that's the meeting time, I'm ready to kneel. But it also means I respect the meeting enough that the space is prepared. The officers respect the meeting enough that they are prepared. The members respect the meeting enough that they're ready. And so there should be a certain anticipation within us with regard to the meeting. And this is not a matter of being ridiculously rigid. It's a matter of respect. Because the one we gather around at the meeting is her. And respect for the meeting, in no small measure, is respect for the other members of the presidium, and it's likewise respect for the one under whose name and under whose eyes we gather. So the regular, punctual attendance at the presidium meeting. And when we are receiving new members, that's something to look at. Can you really do this? And can you get here on time? That is important. That's also why there's a special procedure for when we arrive late. If someone misses the opening prayers, the protocol is that the person doesn't come in and take a seat at the table until he or she first kneels down and says the opening prayers minus the rosary, and then gets up and takes the place. Note, respect for the meeting includes, if I come late, I respect how the meeting begins enough that I first kneel down, and then I take my place. And note the spirituality that lurks behind that. Note the devotion that works behind that. We begin on our knees. We don't begin with the business. And to really enter into harmony with what happens on the table, one must first be composed prayerfully. And then out of the prayer, take his or her place. And somebody who has to come in for whatever reason, stuck in traffic, life was crazy, is not to be judged on that. That's not a moment of embarrassment. That is simply a moment of, before I join, let me first drink in the prayer, and then I can take my place. Because everything emerges out of that initial moment on our knees. And then we come, as I said, to that other element of this, and at that meeting, every active member of the presidium must provide an accurate, not a vague, an accurate and audible, not whispered, not written, report on the work done. Why? Active participation in the meeting is a fundamental legionary obligation. If I'm not going to actively participate, why am I showing up? And, that's a real question. That's a real question. If, for whatever reason, a member has not been able to complete his or her work during the week, or to do it at all, that member still gives a report. Okay? Nobody doesn't give a report. But the report, again, is simple. I was unable to really do my work commitment this week, and this is why. Again, that doesn't have to be said in a spirit of shame. That doesn't have to be said in a spirit of guilt, because we all know life gets away from us sometimes. That's just being honestly accountable. And if a person for 3, 4, or 5 weeks has trouble completing the work assignment or simply can't do it, that gives the presidium and the presidium president an opportunity to say, is there anything we can help you with so that you can loosen up? Or what needs to change so that you can? And I stress this because there are a couple things that happen with the reports. One is sometimes we don't do the work, and so we simply say, I have nothing to report. Well, actually you do. You have the reason why you couldn't do it. And it is not an unfair expectation for us, to just expect that there is an accounting for that. Because, like I said, that is not to criticize, that's simply so that we get in the habit of being open. Secondly, though, the report needs to be accurate. Accuracy has a few requirements to it, okay? And oftentimes in the reporting, we stop short of full accuracy, even though we give a lot of information. Sometimes when legionaries get together and they do the reports are all numbers. And it's remarkable, the numbers. But the numbers don't tell me a thing. Telling me you gave out 100 miraculous medals doesn't tell me a thing. You did it to whom? Did you stand outside the door of the church and just hand them out? Well, on the one hand, yeah, you did something, but on the other hand, to count that as crowd contact is a stretch. On the other hand, and so, no, in addition to the numbers, in addition to the brute fact of I did this, or I visited this house, what happened? What happened? Because part of the reporting is not simply to say, I gave away this resource to this person. That's good, and we should say that. But are there moments of grace that happen during the visit? Pick one, include it in the report. Because that's what upbuilds the presidium. We all know this can be a grind. We all know there are times where this is exhausting. And so to hear those stories of a bit of fulfillment, that's not just for the legionary who experiences it. That lifts up the entire presidium. That lets everybody get a sense of what's going on. And if you have a visitor, that gets their attention. Without even necessarily giving the name of a person, one can say, and in one of my home visits, there was this just remarkable moment of grace and healing with the family. And I walked out of there feeling enriched too. You see the difference? Because what we are doing is worth also sharing with each other. The report also is the time where you say, I was doing this and it just went badly for me this week, and I'm not sure why. And sometimes that's the opportunity for the presidium to offer some suggestions. Sometimes it might be what allows us to say, maybe we need to take a second look at how we're doing some things. And that's useful and important information. So, if there is something reasonably noteworthy from the experience, we want to share that. Otherwise, we're just numbing each other around the table with details. the details are not unimportant. They're simply not the most important. We don't do it for the details. You know, we go forward, and what we want to do is see and celebrate what God is doing through the work Our Lady has given us to do. And again, note then how this implies respect for the work. Because I've been given the work. It's been trusted to me. Which means I'm not the owner of it. And because I'm not the owner of it, and I've simply been loaned, in a sense, this gift, which I've been given as a means of my personal sanctification as well. Not just as an act of service to somebody else. I have to give an accounting for what I've done with that gift. And again, note the insistence implied there, or implied in all of these, that works are assigned, not simply taken, not simply chosen. Point number 2. Second, the daily recitation of the Catena. The Catena is the single most important prayer for the Legion of Mary. There is no more important prayer in the system. It is the only prayer that every member of the Legion of Mary must say every single day. Now, this is interesting. And in structuring the standing instruction this way, let's again talk about receiving new members for a moment. One of the mistakes that many presidia make is somebody shows up for a meeting, and at the end of the first meeting or the second meeting, we're putting a handbook and a tessera in their hands. Don't do that! Don't do that. How many of them leave and you never see them again? You've got 12 weeks. They don't need to get everything all at once because they're not ready for everything all at once. But note this. You have a new member who comes in. That first meeting, we structure the meeting a little differently so we can explain what's happening, so the person can be oriented. We make it a point to have 1 or 2 really good quality work reports. You know, if we know we have somebody coming, it's not a bad idea to remind ourselves, why don't a couple of us really focus on our reports this week? You know, so that we give the person a chance. Then, you know, a simple explanation of what it means to stand after we reported on what we did in our visits and unite our prayers with Mary, thanking God for everything that happened in the visits by praying the Catena. You can do that in the first meeting. Note how easy that is. If the person comes back. Meeting number 2. You don't give them the handbook. Give them the tessera. And say, it seems like you're really interested. What we would like to do is share with you what we pray every day. And you show them the part of the Catena. And somebody can stand with that person at the meeting, point out where in the tessera begins when we stand up, and where it ends. Note how easy that is. And we would like you just every day, just to begin saying this prayer. Note how it makes a connection. And we're sharing something real. On the one hand, it's small. But the handbook is too big a thing. You know, how many of us really feel like we understand the handbook well? You know, think about that. We're laughing at that, and we're handing it to a new person. Here you go. Good luck. And if you figure it out, let me know what it means. You know, so again, if we tease the details out, there's an interesting school of formation here. You know, and that meeting, there could be an allocutio on the meaning of the Catena, or the importance of the Catena. You know, and when that new person comes back the following week, when everybody else has been giving their reports, it wouldn't be inappropriate to say, and, you know, for you, how was your experience praying the Catena? How was that? and just let them share whatever they're going to share. They might have questions that you can answer after the meeting's over, but note that already you begin including them. They don't have work yet. Never give them work right away. But note then how it opens the door to bring somebody in gradually, but also with a deeper knowledge of what we're doing. And all of a sudden you see that the meeting has tools. And when we do this with new members, the reality is the ones who've been around for years suddenly learn the meeting in a new way. Suddenly appreciate the meeting in a new way. The fundamental locus of formation in the Legion of Mary is the meeting. But only when we understand the meeting, only when we really know how the meeting works. But note how beautiful that is. And just a quick summary of some things I said at greater length in earlier conferences. The Catena is the most important prayer in the system, not simply because it's the one we all say every day. We say it every day because it has the most complete summary of the spirit of the Legion of Mary within it. The Catena contains within its words the secret of the Legion's devotion to Mary. And I'm going to walk you very quickly through that secret. The Catena begins with a question. Who is this? Now, note how odd that is. We know it's Mary. That is a line from the Song of Solomon in the Scriptures that for hundreds of years the Church has applied to Our Lady. And note how it begins. We turn to Our Lady and we don't say, oh, it's Mary. We marvel at how unspeakably wonderful she is. The eyes open wide with wonder and we say, who could be like this? Like light breaking out of the long night as morning begins. Who can be like this? Like the brightness of the moon shining out of the darkness. Who can be like this with the warmth and the beauty and the blazing glory of the sun? Who can be like that? When was the last time you thought about Mary that way? The Legion thinks about her that way every single day. That's the Legion's devotion to Mary. Who is this who comes forth terrible as an Achias? An army in battle array is what the word Achias means. Yeah. So note, hidden in all of this are these remarkable ways of really teasing out a fuller understanding of the Legion system and the Legion's devotion. And that idea of the soldiers gathered by their banners, put in order by their queen. And how the presidium meeting in its own way is like a mini Achias. We don't have everybody there. We don't have the procession up to the banner to renew our promises. But what do? We come in from all different directions. We kneel around that table and we are put in good order by our queen. And then we're sent out. And so the Catena asks that beautiful question, marveling at her. And then we have the answer from Mary herself. The woman gives the answer. Who could be beautiful and glorious as this? And she answers, my soul glorifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior. In chapter 3 of the handbook, The Spirit of the Legion of Mary, the simple statement is this. The Spirit of the Legion of Mary is the Spirit of Mary herself, and this prayer is the prayer of her Spirit. And so every day is the drink we take from the well of her Spirit. The Catena concludes with the question asked a second time and is answered a second time by us. O Mary, conceived without sin. Who could be so beautiful? O Mary, conceived without sin. That's who you are. Pray for us who have recourse to thee. And note how that unfolds into a prayer for grace through Mary. What a remarkable mini catechesis, mini summary of the very essence of the spirit and the devotion of the Legion tucked away within that prayer that we say every single day. Which is why it merits a little pacing, a little attention. We don't need to understand its depth all at once, but there's nothing wrong with praying that first antiphon and just pausing and letting its weight hit you before you move on to those words. And to let your own eyes and your own heart swell with wonder as you consider how great Our Lady is. And if every legionary around the world actually did that on a daily basis, even just once a week, imagine how different the quality of our meetings would be. Imagine how different the energy of our service would be. Imagine how much more attractive to our brothers and sisters our example would be. And so again, this second part of the standing instruction, when it puts it there, it's saying, notice the importance of the Catena. It's not simply saying, here's a job for you to do every day. It's saying, we have this here because it's important. And so pay attention to that. And I'm getting the signal that we're running out of time. I get that signal a lot. And so we will conclude here and take a break.